You know, when I decided to do the keynote, I also asked purely for red carpet. I didn't know they were going to do a national announcement for it. So I think everybody got the national announcement that we're starting the keynote. So thank you for coming in. I look back, when you talk about trends, when you talk about disruptions, you have to go all the way back in order to get a vantage point that really abstracts a lot of the nuances or a lot of the short term. You know, I can talk about disruptions and people right away think, well, it's AI. 5 years ago, you talk about disruption, well, it's IoT. Well, if you go all the way back and you take the Fortune 100 and you think about companies that made a mark, left a mark, companies that really shaped the future we are enjoying today. And you look at those names, but you fast forward and you start thinking, how are these companies, how they evolve? How did they go through the changing atmosphere that we've done? So much disruption happened in the last few decades that you start getting this pattern that is a little scary. That disruption, unless it is managed, that disruption, unless it is really taken at not just at face value, but really the understanding of what it is, you start to realize it is not all an opportunity unless you realize it in that moment that it's an opportunity. Because if you fast forward and you take it for granted, the field thins very quickly. Now, for me, the pattern looks at the lost leadership. But what happened? You can think about, okay, well, it was very, it happened very fast. Well, not all of it happened very fast. So the lost leadership could have been from companies that we all understand. Now, companies that are still around potentially, but not in the leadership positions they've had. And primarily, I will tie it to change. The failure to adapt to change. And maybe it's not the not realizing that change is needed, but more on the strategic misstep while you're managing change. Change is difficult. Change is not comfortable. Or a missed technology. The first reaction companies will have in a disruptive change is stay the course. That's okay. However, you can't not ask the question about, is that a transition? Is that a disruption? And while some lost leadership happened, some new leadership been redefined and reestablished. And those leadership are companies we are familiar with. And companies that today you consider household names as well. But that's why I had to go all the way back to a few decades to get that pattern that just as quickly as you can create that leadership, some companies as quickly will lose it. And it anchors on change. But how is that redefining the leadership? It is encouraging the transformation, which is the highest level of change. Getting comfortable with the discomfort. You know, people can say, well, yeah, okay, but some companies got lucky. They were at the right place at the right time. There is no such thing. Most of us are technical backgrounds. I'm an engineer. I don't believe in fate or luck. I'll take it, but I don't believe it. Because those companies, if you look back, anchored on a belief. Some of them are, we're going to do systems. It's no longer about a product. Okay? Fast forward, the outcome was defined. Driving innovation as a core competency, not as an accidental function that we latch onto. And then delivering that strategic results. So being able to execute through. So defining it and capturing it is not even close to delivering it. And that is where leadership is lost and leadership is defined. Now let's look at the area we're in today. If you look at the companies I looked at earlier, you can say there was a disruption, which is the internet, the tech. A disruption that is the phone. Disruption that is a car. Well, look at where we are today. Just look around this show, walk around. The disruption is across every domain, and it is no longer an isolated disruption. For example, automotive, e-mobility. We can talk about electrification and electric vehicles, but you can't talk about cars today without talking about the disruption that AI is creating for the e-mobility, for the vehicle experience. And that is not just how we experience the vehicle, but it is how we are creating this vehicle. So it's no longer a siloed disruption. It is a single across advanced manufacturing in order to deliver the AI, in order to deliver the data center, in order to deliver the vehicle today, you need the manufacturing disruption. So as we start looking at the pattern across where we are, it gets even more complex for how do you manage that? Now, if we look at across, again, just pattern recognition on where we are and how do we navigate. There are two types of outcomes. One is you get paralyzed. How are we going to navigate through it? A single company, how can you expand? Wouldn't you get thinner and lose focus? Or we can take a step back, and any company that knows your core competencies, you start seeing the pattern that you have to go through. And in today's disruption, when you put it all together, the pattern is clear. Every single one of these require a power solution beyond the traditional approach. The siloed power approach, the siloed solutions, the siloed modification or optimization at a localized level is not going to cut it. We can solve power on the e-mobility. If you can't solve it on the AI data center, it will create the bottleneck, given this interconnectivity between all of these domains. And if you take it further, the common thread here is the power density. There are two ways to solve every problem. One is the traditional way, problem, solution, outcome, whatever's at your disposal. Cumulative approximation is not going to get you there, because while we are expanding the complexity of the input, we are also constraining the availability or the flexibility of the output. As data center compute go up in power, the area we have to solve power is shrinking. As vehicles, electric vehicles push for more range, the area we can store that energy and deploy it gets smaller. So solving the power domain without solving the density power question or formula is not going to get us where we need. Anybody can say, yep, we have a 600-mile range car, and the batteries are in the trailer behind us. Or the motor is very big to get the efficiency, therefore, we have one less passenger that can go in the car. So density is the key. And when we look at power specifically, given we're at the IAA, I will take the power problem for the e-mobility for electric vehicles. And the problem is no longer a semiconductor problem. The problem is no longer a battery problem, or a materials problem, or a mechanical problem. What we are trying to solve with the power density and the constraint created for the solution is across every domain that we have to address, from sensors and software to power transistors and packaging, all the way down to the electric machine. And the optimization or the efficiency is only measured in one spot. At the car, how much range you get, if that's what you're optimizing for. That's it. So saying I have the best transistor, and I can say, talk about the transistor that way, we make power transistors. That's our background as onsemi. But that is not enough. We can make, theoretically, the ideal transistor, the promised land of transistors, and it will not even come close to addressing what we need at a system level. And therefore, we have to look at it as the interaction of all of it. And you can look at it as different domains. It is domains that today could cover up to 10 different companies. How are you going to get 10 different companies? For some of you who work in larger companies, think about getting 10 different departments working on a single outcome in order to solve that problem. So you have to blur these silos between every single one of these. We got to remove those barriers. And I'm not talking about how to organize for it. I'm talking about the technical approach for it and how to organize for it. In order to get that density and to get that efficiency, in order to deliver what the complexity of that problem that we were given is. And that requires 3 different pillars. A pillar of innovation. When you come at it from R&D, you say, yep, we're going to solve it with a technical approach. However, it requires leadership and a time to market. Because there is an angle that I talked about before with the companies that are no longer on the map, which is not only failure to adapt or failure to realize there's a need to adapt, it is a failure to adapt as quickly as needed. And where we are today, the disruption is not just technology. The disruption is, it could be the startup next door that's going to disrupt the most established industries we have in the world. And that happened. The automotive, OEMs, the automotive industry is being disrupted by newcomers that never made a vehicle before. But what they have is speed and innovation. So you put it together and you start getting that formula in order to be able to get to market. And with the innovation, this technology, we have to innovate faster and we have to be more efficient in our innovation. And you're starting to see, the 3-pillar innovation, leadership, and time to market, they're not one or the other or the other. You have to do all of them. You can't innovate slow. You have to innovate and address the time to market. Because right next door, there's somebody sitting and trying to disrupt your market faster than you are. And the dial keeps going with, how do you take advantage of what we have? This concept that we all walked into this decade, and we all heard it, and a lot of us invested a lot of money in, all of this digital first. Today, it's AI first. You shouldn't be doing anything in the day-to-day unless you say, can I do it with AI? Why? Because you want to get the efficiency and the time to market. Disrupt your own model. Why wait for somebody to disrupt it? And then remove that rigidity in between every single one of them. And this is internal. Forget about the rigidity of how you do it with your customers. And in order to keep that dial going, the design phases can no longer be what we are all familiar with, which is this gate sign-off process of nobody does anything until we pass the gate. And then we start the next gate and the next gate. This serial approach is not going to work. Parallelism is what is needed in order to do it. And last is we can't think incremental. There's not a single company that went in a disruption, that made its mark in a disruptive state, that took what is in the market today and improved it. They actually took what's in the market today, and their fundamental assumption was, this is not going to work. Let's start with a blank sheet of paper, and that's where the disruption happened. No more incremental. And looking at the leadership, it's the same way. How can we have leadership without change? But I would differentiate leadership with a sustainable leadership. Getting leadership when the things are going up and losing it and not being able to sustain it is not going to work. That's the fundamental approach that we, including at onsemi, are having. And this is the fundamental approach we as an industry must have. This need to adapt our mindset and the willingness to change the traditional ways. And that is where discomfort comes in, but that's where leadership also will come out of. And the self-challenging. If you don't have a group in the company that is working on disrupting your other side of the business, then somebody is doing it. The only difference is you don't know it. And when you know it, it's too late. I'm giving you these formula. This is what we have been doing at onsemi for the last few years in order to get to where we are, where we're able to get this pattern. And I'm sharing it because it does apply beyond the semiconductor industry. It does apply beyond the power domain. It is not the formula for what we're going to do on a power side. It is what we have to do as an industry. Every booth around here, everybody realizes the threat, whether they say it out loud or not. But I will tell you, everybody's working on a way to do it. If I have the privilege to being here 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, whether on this stage or at the show, and we look at the same banner with the companies that were here 5 years ago, and where those companies are today, don't be surprised the names are going to be different. The question is, how many are going to remain and be resilient, and how many new names are we going to have? We can decide not to talk about it because it is controversial, but not talking about it doesn't make it any less real. And therefore, that's what we need to start thinking is we will not be on this chart unless we disrupt our own business and we approach it very differently. And that's where the time to market comes in. It's not about we don't have time to do it. It is the world is moving at a speed, whether it's AI. AI is a big point of that. We're doing things faster. But the speed of innovation is accelerating and the rate of change is increasing. So it's not like we're doing things faster, but at a smaller incremental innovation. We're actually doing things faster with big step functions of innovation. And that is the fundamental disruption that's going to drive it. And it's happening at a multidisciplinary. You know, I talked about we can create the most ideal transistor. You can create the most advanced package. You can create the best system from a digital twin. And the story goes on with the multidisciplinary. However, what we're talking about is being able to do these disruptive innovation at the same time, in parallel. Nothing that I can tell you a Western company has been comfortable doing, unless you came at it from a blank sheet of paper. So how do we bridge this mindset and this lockup in tradition into a blank sheet of paper? It's by reducing those silos. And the silos is what's going to drive this collaboration, this parallelism and overlapping. Our customers cannot wait for us to create the next generation product for them to start innovating on their product. It takes, call it 2 years. You accelerate it 1 year. You accelerate it 6 months. We can create a product in 6 months. We accelerated it to that level. Our mixed signal analog chip used to take 1.5 to 2 years to make. We've transformed ourselves and we're able to deliver now Treo in down to 6 months. In China, we can launch an EV in 1 year, 1.5 years. So it's saying that, hey, we went from 2-year development to 1-year development. Let's go out and celebrate because we did a 50% cycle time reduction. You are still 2x slower than what the market needs. And that only can happen if you start doing parallelism and you start overlapping. And that's where the risk comes in. It doesn't come without risk. It comes with engagement and awareness at every step of the way. You have to go design with of course, it is risky. But this is what we're here for. We are here to manage risk. Without the proper risk, you can't push the boundary. If any of you are race car drivers, unless you spin out with a new car and a new track, you have no idea if you're at the limit or not. So it's not about safety. It is about knowing the limit so you can go at 98% of that limit all the time. That's sustainability. So it's not about taking foolish risks and jeopardizing the production that is in a year or so. It is about taking the calculated risk, but to the level that will cause that disruption, the quantum step to go from incremental to disruptive. It is feasible. But it doesn't come with traditional approaches. It comes with the parallelism, it comes with engagement, it comes with reducing silos, because it's uncomfortable to expose all of this to, quote unquote, your customers. This supplier-customer paradigm doesn't work because it's protectionism. It doesn't work. It's the disrupting this barrier where we are able to do it. Taking it back to the power domain and the complexity of the input and the multidisciplinary complexity of the problem at hand, and overlaying the formula that leads to the proper output that we are looking for. There's one thing becomes clear, which is the one KPI. If I were to summarize it, because I'm an engineer, we're technical, there's always going to have to be a KPI. Otherwise, how do you measure success other than, well, I presented it and it was a cool slide? To me, the KPI is simple. It's scary, but simple. And it has to be simple in words, which is power density will double every 2 years. The concept of incremental is no longer there. The concept of what we used to be, we improved 10%. Well, usually, somebody tells me we improved year on year 10%, I'll be high-fiving. It's not enough. Transformation is not enough. Incremental is not enough. 20% year-on-year improvement is not enough. Now, some of you will argue against it. That's fine. But just don't be surprised. Doubling every 2 years is where we are, because we are moving from a disruption of 1 year to now a knee in the curve, where we have to go from a legacy and a history and decades of incremental improvement in silos with a very clear and rigid handoff between them to a continuous flow of information, innovation, and disruption in order to start changing the bend in the knee to get to that density every 2 years. And on Semi, we have proven already that we shifted away from the knee. We did. But this is not where I'm sitting and being comfortable. Shifting away from the knee is step one. Remember, the continuous and the sustainable leadership that I talk about is sustaining it across and start ourselves driving the new pattern that is now the power density from the traditional power density curves that we have been grown up to believe is the disruption of the domain. So getting to that every 2 years, a doubling effect is no longer about efficiency, it is about disruption, and it's no longer about incremental, It is about evolutionary. And that is not a semiconductor approach. That is a system-level approach, a car approach, an AI data center approach. It is the new approach that we have across the disruptive markets that we are all trying to navigate. Thank you.